Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I am Harvey Aronson, one of the founding co-directors of Dawn Mountain, and I am coming to you from Capitan, New Mexico this morning. We are celebrating July 4th, Sunday, New Mexico. And it is first Sunday, and it is our custom to have a Dharma talk followed by meditation at 11 Central Daylight Time. And then we will have a Dharma conversation at 12 noon Central Daylight Time. So today I wanted to talk about two things, both somewhat briefly. It is a day we celebrate our independence from the British when we were colonies. And it struck me to say something about interdependence. It's interesting being a modern Westerner, being a modern American. We actually spend a lot of cultural energy on thinking about autonomy and independence. And I think there is, in many, many fields, nowadays, a greater and greater appreciation of interdependence. There's certainly a whole field of studies called systems studies. And when I was training as a psychotherapist, now 35 years ago, systems therapy actually at that time was considered quite innovative and radical. But what do Buddhism and systems theory tell us about interdependence as opposed to independence? You know, it's interesting if you read cultural history and even look at something like John Locke, who is really one of the founding thinkers of our democracy. He very, very strongly presented a vision of we enter life as a blank slate and everyone is created equal. And there's within that also the sense of a kind of nuclear autonomy. We are all these kind of individual particles that stand on our own. You know, in Buddhist frame, we enter life not as a blank slate at all, but with a rich karmic history, which means that all of us are quite distinct and different coming into our lives. And the other thing that certainly Buddhism emphasizes, and I think it's true of actually almost all traditional cultures, and cultural psychologists who write say that this kind of views of hyper autonomy that we carry in the modern West and certainly in modern America are quite divergent from what's present throughout the globe. And so for us in modern America, in the modern West, it's very, very important to bring our attention to our interdependence, not only our independence. Our independence is amazing and wonderful, and our capacity to have free thought, free movement, autonomy of expression, come up with unique ideas and follow through. It's all amazing, and it's been tremendously significant for innovation. And at the same time, there's so much that we seem to miss if we don't pay attention to interdependence. I think that this pandemic that we've all been involved with, and many of us have been seemingly independent during this period. I certainly know that we've been in our gopher holes for large extended periods of time, and we're just now emerging. But think about it, even as we were alone and autonomous, of course we had to eat. And this enormous kind of supply chain of food that terminated in someone delivering food to our front porch. Our lives depended on these individuals who were kind enough to get into their cars and carry the bags of groceries that they had picked up at the store, and the store was kind enough to stock it, and the people who were stocking it were kind enough to be doing their work, and the truck drivers were kind enough to be delivering the food to the supermarkets. And some of you have probably heard me go through the whole supply chain. And we don't have to do that right now, but our lives were dependent on so many individuals producing food, delivering food, and ultimately these drivers who are underpaid, delivering food to our front door. And really, really, what a debt of gratitude we owe them. And when we go out for one of the first times and we go to get our shots, and we go to a large mass gathering place organized by Methodist Hospital in Houston, Texas, and there are people, directing traffic, and then there are people telling us where to sit, and then there's the person who's administering the vaccine, let alone the people who develop the vaccine and deliver the vaccine. Again, many of them poorly paid. And again, our lives depend on these frontline workers delivering this vaccine that opens up all sorts of possibilities of greater independence and freedom. But it's all based on interdependence. People we don't even know who are often very gracefully serving us with good cheer, administering the vaccines, directing us to where to get it, allowing us to have it, the people who were delivering it, the truck drivers. Our lives are totally interdependent. And when that interdependence becomes frail or ripped, for example, when in Houston we experienced a freeze and there was no power for 3 or 4 days, some of us maybe longer, we see how interdependent we are. Some few people making some few bad decisions affected millions of people. And there we were, really uncomfortable, cold, no electricity. Thank God for gas stove in the kitchen, and no food being delivered, whatever. Some people died. Many of us had frozen pipes because of interdependence and a break in the interdependence. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity on Independence Day to just bring to mind how dependent and interdependent we all are. Anne and I shared a moment this morning appreciating that in 1946, Anne's mother arrived. We both were crying a little bit this morning. On July 4th, a war bride from Europe. Her husband was already in the United States. He had served in the military during the war. They had been separated early on, I think in maybe 41, maybe 40 even. Hadn't seen or heard much from each other for 5 years. And so the interdependence on July 4th is Anne's mother came, and soon thereafter, Anne's mother and father decided to produce Anne. It's a wonderful interdependence. And then 50 years ago, Anne recalled that on July 4th, she met Geisha Wangel, another wonderful interdependence. We are in relationships and we are mutually affecting one another, sometimes for better, sometimes for ill, but we are all connected. And, you know, if we get into anatomy and physiology and look at our bodies and the cellular structure, and there's so many interconnections. You know, if you get down into the kidneys and you study the kidneys, there are these little follicles in the kidneys, and then there's an area of the kidneys where there's one pH, the acidity and the alkalinity is one way, and in another area of the kidneys, the acidity and alkalinity is different. And it's a wonder of interdependence. It's an absolute mind-blowing interdependence. Whatever it is that has brought this forth, it's just astonishing. And so being able to bring to mind our delicate and complicated interdependence, human to human, cellular structure to cellular structure. And then, of course, if we kind of take into watching some of these videos on cosmology of late, and turns out, you know, any of the heavy metals that inhabit our bodies, for example, the iron that's in our bloodstream, we all have iron in our bloodstream. I mean, one of the main ingredients of hemoglobin. It's stardust. It's from the stars. I mean, it's not like it didn't come from anywhere. It came from stars collapsing, the amazing reactions that are going on when stars are born and collapse and collide is what generates everything, apparently, aside from helium, hydrogen, and lithium, which may have originated in the Big Bang. But those are like the smallest three elements, or a little review of chemistry. And to get anything larger, you have to put those billiard balls together and get them to transmogrify into something that's not helium, hydrogen, or lithium. It's not an easy deal, but again, interdependence. Some zillions of years ago, some stars collapsed and created stardust and arrived on Earth, and Earth formed. And, you know, if you just contemplate this, and somewhere along the lines, we came by our iron and our hemoglobin and all the other heavy metals in our bodies. Interdependence. Cosmically, microscopically, and human to human. It's part of what generates an understanding of an absence of kind of an autonomous, permanent, independent self that Buddhism teaches. We're made up of so many constituents that are all interdependent, moment to moment consciousness. Everything is changing from moment to moment. So I encourage everyone whenever, whether it's in observing nature or watching cosmology or recognizing the incredible kindness of the checkout person at your local grocery store, whether they're happy or they're grumpy. I mean, we wouldn't have groceries unless this person was standing there and serving us. So kind. We can be so appreciative of all these individuals who are, for the most part, in our culture, so willing and so happy to serve us and work with us. It is a miracle. So the other thing I wanted to mention was I had lunch with a friend here, a friend of mine who lives in Albuquerque now, used to live in Santa Fe. And we were talking, and I was asking him if he was involved in any kind of particular spiritual activity. Historically, he had been. And he said the only thing that he was really doing now was appreciating nature. That was his spiritual activity. And he seemed a little bit deflated about that. And I felt, sort of coming away from that conversation, that intentionally or not, had I conveyed some idea that one had to be involved in some kind of explicit spiritual practice. I just started thinking about that a little bit. And we are, of course, dedicated to explicit spiritual practice. There's a lot being made nowadays of spiritual but not religious. People like to be involved in something spiritually, but not all of the involved with the organizational elements of religion. There's quite a bit of kind of pushback on that. We happen to be affiliated with a very specific organized religion of Buddhism. We're a religious group. But I think it's important to have a very, very open mind about the fact that people can be coming to religious understandings through many, many diverse paths, and to appreciate that while we are very focused in our pursuit and engage in spiritual practice in a way to optimize our religious experience, many, many individuals come to spiritual experience spontaneously, or maybe through minimal involvement in something like meditation or prayer. And it's wonderful. It's amazing that people can have access to some kind of touching, deepening understanding without formal involvement. We certainly feel that we bring something specific and have something specific to offer. Clearly, I mean, we dedicate our lives to that. But can we somehow have openness to the wonders and the wonderfulness that people experience in their own life, sometimes without any connection to a particular tradition? So it brought to mind the writings of Abraham Maslow, who in 1962 wrote a book called Towards a Psychology of Being, where he explored what he called peak experiences. And these are experiences that come upon people, and I'm quoting from Wikipedia here, who is quoting from Maslow's writing in 1964 in another book on peak experiences. These are experiences of rare, exciting, oceanic, deeply moving, exhilarating, elevating experiences that generate an advanced form of perceiving reality and are even mystic and magical in their effect upon the person. It's quite wonderful. People have peak experiences, deeply moving, exhilarating experiences, magical and mystical. I wondered a long time about that after reading it and then getting involved with organized spiritual practice. How was it that some people kind of lucked out and had these experiences? And where I turned to was a teaching in Theravada meditative psychology on the ingredients that go into meditative absorptions. And I thought I would share that with you. There are 5 ingredients, 5 elements that develop mental focus, concentration, what's called samadhi in almost all of the Indic and Buddhist traditions. And we practice this when we practice our meditation on the breath. We practice it when we practice cultivating love. When we practice it even when we're cultivating some sorts of insight practices. The first element of concentration is placing the mind on an object. And that we put our mind on our breathing. And the second element is sustaining our attention on the object. In Pali, the terms are vitakka and vichara. These have a lot of interesting meanings in the Indic world, but in the specific Theravada meditation context, vitakka is the initial application of mind to an object, and then vichara is the sustained application of mind to an object. And what follows is interesting. There's a particular quality of mind that arises, which is called pleasurable interest. In Pali, it's called piti. In Sanskrit, it's priti, piti. And then upon even deepening from that pleasurable interest, deep pleasure or even bliss, sukha, can arise, which is the opposite of dukkha, which is suffering. Sukha or bliss arises, pleasure, bliss. And following that, then the mind is very, very easily concentrated, or samadhi. And it occurs to me that when we're talking about people experiencing peak experiences, I think people are somewhat naturally having their mind on an object. I mean, some of the places that people have peak experiences are knitting or cutting celery or enjoying nature. And at least one way for me to understand this is that people are very, very naturally putting their mind on the object and sustaining their attention on the object. And then there's this pleasurable interest. It was actually, if we meditate a lot, sometimes we get a little more understanding of what some of these teachings really are referring to. So when I was cultivating mindfulness of the breath in a very, very intensive way, for, like 14 hours a day for 3 or 4 days in these intensive retreats we used to do, it was, the breath really is kind of, it's not that interesting an object. It's pretty neutral. uh, many people would say, God, it's boring. Why would you even pay any attention to the breathing? But it was astounding to me how interesting the process of breathing became. It was phenomenal. It's just like fascinating. It was pleasurable interest. It was actually, I could get what that pleasurable interest was in a real palpable manner. For those of us who don't collect stamps, or those of us who don't enjoy cutting celery, those of us who don't enjoy knitting, it's really, really hard to appreciate how could those things be so exciting and so much fun. Chopping celery, looking at stamps and the perforations of the stamps, or chopping celery while you're cooking. But it turns out as the mind settles, things become pleasurably interesting, and there can even be kind of bliss. You're in nature and all of a sudden you're transported and you're in a state of openness and non-duality and understanding something about life in a, again, non-verbal manner that's spontaneous and deep. Your mind was on the object and it was sustained in pleasurable interest, and bliss and concentration followed. And you were sitting there in what Maslow, in nice English words, calls a peak experience. Exciting, oceanic, deeply moving, exhilarating, of an advanced form of perceiving that are even mystic and magical in their effect. So it's helpful to have an appreciation that people can spontaneously arrive at these experiences. And it's also helpful to recognize that when we're cultivating our meditation, we are generating habits that incline us to this kind of spontaneous arising of interest, pleasure, focus that can more and more occasionally permeate not only our meditation, but other areas of our lives. These are skills that cross-apply. And so that if you're a meditator and you're looking at art, or if you're a meditator and you're listening to music, the possibility that it will naturally be suffused with more and more spiritual-like qualities are enhanced. So I thought I would share those thoughts on both interdependence and the idea that, many, many people arrive at spiritual experiences naturally. And also in the cultivation of meditation, we are upping the possibility by developing skills specifically in these 5 factors of meditation: initial application of mind, sustained application, the natural arising of pleasurable interest, pleasure, and single-pointedness. So with that, I will call an end to this part of our program, and we will do whatever is necessary to transition to our moving into our meditation teaching at 11 Central Time.